Ghosting has become one of those therapy buzzwords that seems to get thrown around wildly these days. I've seen someone say that they experienced trauma because their Tinder match, who they had never met before, ghosted them by not showing up for their coffee date. Or a mild acquaintance they'd hung out with in a group of friends once or twice suddenly doesn't show up for their birthday party and thus became a ghost to them. I've even heard people say their cable company ghosted them when a line dropped on a customer service call. I don't want to police anyone else's feelings, but I find this use of the ghosting term, for what I see as pretty fucking mild events, to be a little offensive. Everything is on a sliding scale, I suppose, but when you've had someone you truly loved abandon you, it, as Taylor Swift would say, hits different. This is The Crime at Camp Ashwood. Episode 6, Ghosting. It probably wouldn't surprise anyone to know that I've been in a lot of therapy. I know my wounds, maybe even a little too well for my own good, and abandonment is the queen of them all. The clearest case of ghosting in my life is someone who left me twice. Sadie moving away when we were kids had set me up for a lifetime of expecting that my most treasured people would all exit abruptly eventually. Her death made that wound profoundly worse, obviously. Nothing will make you understand ghosting, like an actual ghost. This is the crux of where the term comes from, to me at least. The lack of closure when something ends without your consent or input. When someone disappears and won't or can't respond to you anymore, the result is crazy-making. Your mind becomes like a skipping record player, trying to go back to what you might have said or done had you been given any choice in the matter. As many hours as I've spent trying to solve Sadie's murder, I've spent endlessly more thinking about what I would have said to her had I known those final camp moments would be our last together.
Dun, da, da, da. Full house.
I need to stop betting against you. You're too good at this.
But then how would I win all your canteen candy bar cash?
You never even buy any of the candy.
My mama taught me that a woman should always have her own savings.
I don't think you're going to get very far with an extra $12, but okay. Ugh. I'm like sleepy, but not.
I blame June's ghost stories. They're getting creepier.
Tonight's was a lot.
Well, if it makes you feel better, there's no way that one was true. I think if someone's ex had cut off his own finger and hidden it in a bunk bed, it would have made the news.
Yeah. I think I'm also a little nervous about the dance.
JJ, have you spooked?
I've never really been to a dance with a guy before. And seeing Paul sneak off with you to go make out, I don't know what the expectations are.
Margot, I don't think there are any. I mean, JJ's sweet. He'll go at your pace. That's why I suggested him for you.
Right.
And if he doesn't, you tell him to fuck off, okay? You don't have to put up with stuff like that.
I know that.
See? You know yourself, Margot. That's why I don't worry about you at all.
Well, that makes one of us. My guidance counselor asked me to write up a 5-year plan once, and I couldn't think of anything I'd want to do 5 years from now except be a counselor at Ashwood. What's your 5-year plan?
Mostly to get the hell out of here.
Wait, what?
Maybe take these top-notch card skills to Vegas. Really make bank and be fabulously wealthy. Take on a husband or 3. Become a woman of national intrigue. A tabloid sensation. Lady Sadie.
Honestly, I believe you could make that happen.
Oh, I have the poker face to pull off almost anything.
As long as you promise not to forget about me when you make your millions.
Margot, I could never, ever forget about you. I love you. You know that, right?
Of course I do. And ditto. What if something I could have said that night would have changed the outcome? What if she knew she was in danger and I could have gotten her to open up to me? What if she tried to tell me, and I missed it. There's no worse game than what if, when the person you're what ifing about is dead. But a very close second is when they're still alive, but you had to grieve them anyway. In the months following Sadie's death, JJ felt like the final gift that she'd left me. He was everything a first boyfriend should be. Thoughtful, patient, invested. We looked at the world the same way, almost like we'd actually been professionally matched. And as much as I hate to admit it, we were probably a lot like Veronica and Paul. The trauma had bonded us. Speaking of Paul, he was the only thing we couldn't agree on. Every time the subject came up, he'd shut down. Tell me nothing. Our nightly phone calls were filled with reviews of romantic mixtapes we'd made, sweet comments about how we'd missed each other from states away all day long. But they often ended with tension over this divide. JJ and Paul were as close as Sadie and I had been, and he wasn't ever going to entertain that he might have been responsible for what happened to her. He was always going to be on Paul's side, and I would always be outnumbered. My sidekick was gone. I thought we'd eventually come to a mutual agreement to disagree, which seems insane to me now, but at 16 I was willing to bend and twist and stretch to make our relationship work. JJ wasn't. One night, after I'd pushed harder than I'd ever pushed before about what JJ had seen the night of the dance, I woke the next day and sent my usual good morning text to him. He hasn't responded to it still, 20 years later. I'm almost embarrassed to admit it, but back then this hit me almost harder than what happened to Sadie. It could have been the cumulative nature of things, but maybe it was also that Sadie had the best excuse in the world for not getting back to me, no matter how much I pleaded. JJ had a choice, and his choice was to disappear. He pulled the rug out from a person who'd already lost the foundation to her house. It still stings. So, when Veronica told me that JJ could corroborate an alibi for Paul, something I guess he'd felt unnecessary to share with me years ago, livid was an understatement. But I can't deny that I've had a little masochistic wish to pay a visit to this ghost for a long time. I've played out the speech I would give JJ about how much he hurt me, or how pathetic it was that he didn't have the balls to have a simple conversation explaining himself in the past 2 decades. How happy I am now, how married and well-adjusted, no thanks to him, etc. But to be honest, when I saw him, I didn't say any of that. Mostly because he just seemed kind of embarrassed to see me. And sad. He's in this little apartment. Bottles of liquor all over the place. I don't know what he's doing for work, but generally speaking, it seems to have all not gone very well for him. 17-year-old me spent a not insignificant amount of time wishing bad things on him as punishment for hurting me, playing mental voodoo dolls, waiting for the karma to kick in. But I didn't mean it. Not really. Not that I think I'm responsible for the state of his life, but I hope I didn't send any of those vibes his way. Because it does seem like Sadie's death, and the way it impacted everyone around him, has haunted JJ in many ways that he never got over too. And maybe he's not as good at pretending to bounce back as the rest of us have been. Partly because he's been carrying a secret. JJ and Paul did go missing from the dance for about an hour and a half. I vaguely remember this, JJ saying something had come up and he'd be back soon, and me being a little relieved to have a break from him where I could not worry about whether I was sweating through the sleeves of my dress. He'd laid a bouquet of flowers on my bunk bed when I got back to my room that night, and I thought that's where he had been. But really, he and Paul were running an important errand for Sadie. In the basement of her parents' house on the lake, there was a folder and a bag full of things that she'd hidden in a little crawl space where we'd once played when we were kids. She'd asked Paul to break into the Cameron's house, find it, and bring it back. It was a simple enough task. Sadie's parents were on vacation in the Outer Banks. Paul and JJ could get the goods and be back halfway through the dance without anyone the wiser. But teenage boys are loath to do anything simply, it seems, so Paul added a stop along the way. JJ's family didn't come from money, and Paul had come up with a business plan to help him make a little extra for his college fund. The plan itself involved buying cheap marijuana and reselling it to the wealthier boys at Camp Rockland at a premium. It wasn't a terrible idea, in theory. The Rockland boys absolutely would have spent more than the average kid to get weed at camp. JJ did need money. The good intentions Veronica attributes to Paul seem to be real, but I still think she overlooks how misguided and dumb the executions are. Because there was no way they weren't going to get caught sneaking boatloads of marijuana into camp on a canoe. Even if their counselor Rick was infamous for turning a blind eye to the rules, Mr. Mackenzie wasn't. Someone was going to tell on them. And remember, the year was 2003. The punishment for something like this would have been a hell of a lot more than a slap on the wrist. The transaction with the dealer went fine, though, and the boys had loaded their canoe up before paddling over to the Cameron's house. They made it all the way to the basement, standing at the top of the creaky old stairs that went down into the darkness. But Sadie's dad wasn't on vacation like she'd been told. Instead, he was standing over Paul and JJ with a baseball bat. He got a swing in on Paul's stomach immediately. JJ said it seemed like he'd been waiting for an excuse to lay one on his daughter's boyfriend for a long time. But then Mr. Cameron picked up the phone to dial the police. Paul and JJ had exchanged a glance. Paul's dad was going to be livid about the breaking and entering. He already had it out for him, but the drugs were going to destroy JJ's life. He didn't have a sheriff for a dad. He didn't have money for a lawyer. He wasn't white. He was going to be completely screwed. So Paul took over. He told Mr. Cameron not to call the police or his dad, but to give his mom a call. Mrs. Westerly and her inheritance was the ultimate solution to anything when her son was in trouble. Mr. Cameron had balked for a second, pissed at the boys and shouting about how he couldn't be bought. But Paul had one more card to play. He said he knew where Sadie had hidden a folder of very important information. Secrets. If the police were called, he could tell them where to look for it. Both Paul and Mr. Cameron seemed to know that whatever was in that folder was bad, and that if Mr. Cameron wanted Paul and JJ to go down for a crime tonight, he was going to go down for one too. So they all agreed. Tonight stayed between the three of them. If one said something, the others would too. Mutually assured destruction. They shook on it, and the boys made it back to the dance before anyone noticed they were gone. But by then, Sadie was gone already.
Hey, Margot, did you find Sadie?
No, we need to tell Mrs. Mackenzie. Something isn't right.
Okay, Margot, let's breathe. Do you think she's with Paul?
She's not. He and JJ are over by the DJ, and Paul said he was looking for her, but I don't know, he's acting really weird, and I just went out by the lake, and there's a canoe overturned on the shore, and I'm really worried. She wouldn't miss the dance by choice. I know that.
Okay, let me go say something. We'll figure it out.
So Paul was protecting JJ. JJ was protecting Paul. Mr. Cameron was protecting himself. I wish to God anyone had been protecting Sadie. When the news broke of her disappearance, this truce between the three of them simultaneously made them all look guilty. The intent to steal her belongings wouldn't help Paul or JJ's case, and the contents of those belongings would have apparently made Mr. Cameron look pretty bad. But it also gave them an alibi. The likelihood that any of them could have made it across the lake in time to hurt her was slim. But with no exact time of death ever recorded, there was no foolproof way to say. JJ gave me a rough timeline of he and Paul's trip, which includes the time that Mr. Cameron was with them at his house. I try hard not to think about the dance. It's haunted me enough in my dreams. But piecing together exactly what happened when is the only way to rule anyone out of the suspect list. Or onto it.
She'll be okay, Margot.
Oh, where is she, though? This is crazy.
Hey, girls.
Did they?
No. They're looking everywhere, though. I was just with the Mackenzies. We've called both of your parents. They'll be here in the morning.
We're going home?
I'm not leaving here until we find her.
That's fine. They're just concerned. Honestly, I think a lot of other campers' parents will be picking them up tomorrow. This is going to be all over the news, even if they do find her.
There's no if. And the last thing I want to do is leave camp in the middle of all this. June, turn on the music. Just do a story. We can't just stop.
Margot, hey, just...
I think this is the end of our ghost stories, guys.
No, stop it.
Actually, this is also going to be my last night at Ashwood.
What?
Someone complained that I was really scaring campers with the whole Misty Willis thing.
That's not true.
I guess word got around and somebody's mom was upset, or I don't know. Mr. Mackenzie just told me it's my last day here.
God.
The only thing that matters right now is that we find Sadie. Make sure that she's safe and get her back with people who care about her. Everything else is just everything else right now. Oh, girls, I'm so sorry. Come here.
I've been putting together the timeline of that night since I got back. Tried to jog my own memory as other people have given me their recollections, but it's hard. Hell, it's hard to remember events from last night correctly sometimes without letting my emotions dictate what my brain chooses to keep or discard. When it's been decades, getting a clear picture feels impossible. But I do have one piece of evidence that I haven't touched yet. Mostly because I guess I wasn't ready. I'm ready now. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Crime at Camp Ashwood. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss a single episode. If you'd like to support this podcast so we can keep making more episodes, click the support link in the show notes. To learn more about this and all our projects, visit our production company websites, dragonhunterproductions.com and newgirlpictures.com. Thank you for listening.